Welcome back to Paranightmares, where the night whispers and we listen. If creepy tales and unsettling shadows are your kind of lullaby, you're in the right place. Before we descend into tonight's darkness, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. After you finish the video, let us know which part made your skin crawl most. I'm watching, and I read everyone. I've always cherished my solitude. As a freelance data analyst, my house isn't just my home. It's my office, my sanctuary, a fortress of quiet concentration. My husband, Mark, travels frequently for his job, leaving me alone for weeks at a time in our suburban two-story house. The development we live in is new, one of those master-plan communities where every lawn is perfectly manicured and a sense of quiet security is the main selling point. The lots are spacious, and our backyard backs up to a dense, protected greenbelt of woods. For 3 years, those woods were a source of peace, a beautiful, natural backdrop to my quiet life. Until last fall. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Mark had been gone for about a week, and I was deeply engrossed, a complex dataset, the rhythmic click-clack of my keyboard the only sound in the house. My office is on the second floor, with a large window that gives me a panoramic view of the backyard and the woods beyond. I'd glanced up from my screen to rest my eyes when I first saw him. He was standing at the very edge of the tree line, about 100 yards away, just where the manicured lawn met the chaotic underbrush. He was a tall man, dressed in dark, practical clothing, jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled up despite the mild weather. He was perfectly still, his posture rigid, and he was staring directly at my house. My initial reaction wasn't fear, but annoyance. It was probably a neighbor looking for a lost dog, or a hiker who had wandered off the designated trails. Still, something about his stillness was unnerving. People don't just stand and stare like that. I watched him for a full minute, expecting him to move, to call out, to do something. He did nothing. I squinted, trying to make out his face, but the distance and the shadow of his hood made it impossible. Feeling a prickle of unease, I got up and moved away from the window, telling myself he'd be gone when I looked again. An hour later, I forced myself to glance outside. He was still there. Same spot, same posture. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the yard, and his figure seemed darker, more ominous. The annoyance had curdled into genuine fear. This wasn't normal. I walked through the house, checking the locks on all the doors and windows, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I even slid the chain on the front door, a precaution I rarely took. I tried to go back to work, but my concentration was shattered. My eyes kept flicking to the window. He was a statue carved from shadow. Why wasn't he moving? What did he want? My mind started to race through terrifying possibilities. Was he a burglar casing the house? A squatter from the woods? Someone who knew Mark was away? As dusk began to bleed into the sky, I saw him move for the first time. He took a single, deliberate step out of the woods and onto my lawn. It was a small movement, but it felt like a massive violation, a crossing of a sacred boundary. I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over the numbers 911. What would I say? There's a man standing in my yard. It sounded flimsy, paranoid. I decided to wait, to see what he would do next. He didn't move again for another hour. By now, it was almost completely dark. His silhouette was barely visible against the deep gloom of the woods. I turned off all the lights in the house, so he couldn't see me watching him from the upstairs window. The house felt vast and empty around me. Every creak of the floorboards a potential footstep. Every gust of wind against the glass a hand trying to latch. Then he moved again. Another slow, deliberate step. Then another. He was walking toward the house, his pace agonizingly slow, as if he were savoring every moment, enjoying the terror he knew he must be inspiring. He never took his eyes off the house. That was it. I scrambled for my phone and dialed 911, my voice a choked whisper as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. She was calm and professional, assuring me that a patrol car was on its way and that I should stay on the line and keep away from the windows. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. My entire being screamed with the need to know where he was, how close he was getting. The 10 minutes it took for the police to arrive felt like an eternity. I sat huddled in my walk-in closet, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dispatcher's calming voice and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel of my driveway. "The officer is there, ma'am," the dispatcher said. "He's approaching the front door." I crept out of the closet and peered through the blinds of a side window. I saw the police car, its lights painting strobing patterns of red and blue across the front of my house. An officer was walking the perimeter of the yard with a powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. After what felt like an age, my doorbell rang. It was the officer. He was young, with a kind, reassuring face. "Ma'am," he said, "we've searched the entire property and the edge of the woods. There's no one here." But he was there. I insisted, my voice trembling. He was walking towards the house. "We found a set of footprints in the grass," he admitted. "They lead from the woods and stop about halfway to your back patio. Then they just stop. There are no prints leading away. It's like he just vanished." He gave me a look that was a mixture of pity and suspicion. He suggested it might have been a prank, some local kids. He told me to call if I saw anything else, and then he left. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a chair in my living room, staring at the black rectangle of the patio door, a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. The house was silent again, but the silence was no longer peaceful. It was menacing, filled with the memory of the man's presence. He never came back. At least, I never saw him in the yard again, but his presence lingers. Sometimes, when I'm working in my office, I'll feel a sudden, intense chill, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I'll glance out the window at the woods, my eyes scanning the tree line, half expecting, half dreading to see his dark, still figure standing there. The police never found him. The footprints that just stopped in the middle of my lawn were never explained. My husband thinks I was overwrought, that my imagination got the better of me. But I know what I saw. He wasn't a prankster. He wasn't a burglar. He was something else. And I know that he didn't vanish. He just found a better place to watch me from. A place much, much closer. I live on the second floor of a converted Victorian house. One of those beautiful old dinosaurs with intricate woodwork and a soul that groans and sighs with the weather. The house is split into 3 apartments. The first floor is occupied by a sweet, elderly couple, the Millers. The 3rd floor, the attic apartment, had been vacant for the 6 months I'd lived there. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, told me he was particular about who he rented it to, given its strange layout and the fact that you had to pass my front door on the landing to get to it. I loved the quiet. Being sandwiched between the gentle Millers and an empty attic was perfect for a grad student like me who survived on caffeine and silence. My life was a predictable cycle of library, thesis writing, and sleep. That predictability shattered the day someone moved in upstairs. I didn't meet him. I just heard him. The sound started on a Monday evening. A heavy, rhythmic thumping, like furniture being dragged across the floor. Then, the unmistakable sound of a heavy-duty lock being installed on his side of the door. An odd choice for an internal apartment door, but I shrugged it off. Some people are just security conscious. The new tenant was nocturnal. I never saw him come or go. But every night, once the Millers were asleep and the house fell silent, the sounds from the 3rd floor would begin. It wasn't the usual noise of a neighbor, no TV, no music, no muffled conversations. It was industrial, a low, constant humming, like some kind of large machine was running. It was punctuated by a sharp, metallic clank, followed by a sound I can only describe as wetly dragging something heavy across the floor. This would go on for hours, usually from midnight until just before dawn. My curiosity quickly morphed into a creeping dread. Who was this person? What could they possibly be doing up there? The sounds were methodical, repetitive, and deeply unsettling. I started losing sleep, lying awake in bed, my ceiling a sounding board for the grim activities above. My imagination, fueled by academic stress and sleep deprivation, ran wild. Was he a counterfeiter? A mad inventor? Something much, much worse? After a week of this, I tried to catch a glimpse of him. I started staying up, watching the shared stairwell from my peephole. I never saw a thing. No food deliveries, no visitors, no tenant. It was as if he could teleport in and out of the apartment. The only evidence of his existence was the nightly noise and the thick, black garbage bags that would appear by the curb on trash day, always tied with an unusual, intricate knot. One night, the humming was louder than usual. It was accompanied by a series of frantic thuds against the floor, my ceiling. It sounded like a struggle, then a sharp, piercing sound, like a saw hitting bone, followed by an abrupt silence. The humming stopped. The dragging stopped. Everything stopped. I lay in my bed, paralyzed with fear, for over an hour. The silence was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. Finally, I mustered the courage to call the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation, the strange noises, the reclusive neighbor, the sound of the struggle. I felt foolish, like a nosy neighbor, but the fear was overwhelming. The police arrived and I let them into the building. They knocked on the third-floor apartment door. No answer. They knocked again, louder this time, announcing themselves. Silence. The officer, a world-weary man with a thick mustache, looked at me. "Are you sure you heard a struggle?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. They got the landlord on the phone, who reluctantly gave them permission to enter the apartment, citing a wellness check. A young officer picked the standard lock with surprising ease, but the door wouldn't budge. It was held fast by the heavy-duty lock on the other side. They had to use a battering ram. The door finally burst open, revealing a scene of utter horror. The apartment was not a home. It was a workshop. The floor was covered in plastic sheeting, stained with dark, rust-colored patches. The air was thick with the smell of bleach and decay. In the center of the room was a large, stainless steel table, like something from a morgue. On the walls hung an array of terrifying tools: saws, cleavers, drills, and strange, custom-made implements of sharpened metal. But the most horrific discovery was in the far corner. It was a collection of life-size dolls. They were constructed from a grotesque patchwork of materials: mannequin parts, animal hides, and, unmistakably, pieces of human beings. Skin was stretched over plastic limbs. Human hair was crudely stitched onto bald heads. And the eyes were glassy, taxidermied eyes that stared blankly into the room. There was no sign of the tenant, but on the steel table, under a powerful work light, was his latest project, unfinished. It was a female figure, and its face was a perfect, plaster-cast replica of my own, taken from a photo on my university department's website. He hadn't just been my neighbor. He had been studying me, preparing me to be his next creation. The police discovered he had been renting the apartment under a fake name, paying in cash mailed from different states. They found a small, hidden crawl space leading to the roof. That's how he came and went without being seen. He was a ghost, a phantom who built his grotesque family in the dead of night, right above my head. I moved out the next day. I couldn't stay in that house, knowing what had been happening on the third floor. They never caught him. Sometimes I wonder if he's found a new workshop, a new quiet building with a resident he can study from above. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I think I can still hear the faint, metallic clank and the wet, dragging sound, and I know that I was meant to be the centerpiece of his collection. The answering machine was a relic, an ancient piece of technology that had come with the landline in the house I'd inherited from my grandmother. It was a clunky, beige box with a cassette tape and a single, bulbous red light that would blink when there was a new message. In an age of smartphones and voicemail, I should have thrown it out, but it was part of the house, part of her, so I kept it plugged in on the dusty telephone table in the hallway. I never got any calls on that line. The number was practically a ghost. I'd been living in the house alone for about 6 months after Nana passed. It was a big, rambling farmhouse set way back from the county road, surrounded by acres of quiet fields. The solitude was both a comfort and a burden, the silence often feeling deeper and lonelier than I cared to admit. The blinking red light started on a Monday. I came home from my job at the local library to find it pulsing rhythmically in the dim hallway. A slow, steady beat. Blink. blink, blink. My first thought was that it was a wrong number, or perhaps a telemarketer who had somehow unearthed this fossilized phone number. I pressed the play button. The taped word clicked, and then a voice filled the silence. It was a man's voice, raspy and low, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. "I know you're there," it whispered, followed by a long, drawn-out silence before the line clicked dead. A chill snaked down my spine. It was unnerving, but I tried to rationalize it. A prank call. A creepy wrong number. I tried to dismiss it, but the whisper echoed in my mind. "I know you're there." It was so direct, so personal. I deleted the message, the machine making a loud clunk as it reset. I tried to put it out of my head. The next day, I came home from work, and the red light was blinking again. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood before the machine for a full minute before I could bring myself to press the button. The same raspy voice, a little closer this time, a little more insistent. "I see you," it rasped, followed by the sound of what I can only describe as a wet, ragged breath, like someone with fluid in their lungs. Then the click. This was no longer a prank. Panic began to set in. "I see you." How could he see me? I ran through the house, checking all the windows, peering out into the empty fields that surrounded the property. There was no one. The house was isolated. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to watch from. I called the phone company. They were sympathetic but unhelpful. The calls were coming from a blocked, untraceable number. They suggested I unplug the phone if it was bothering me. It was sound advice, but the thought of not knowing if he was still calling, still leaving his terrifying messages, was somehow worse. The blinking red light was a sign, warning. The third message came that night. I was in bed, reading, when I heard the faint click of the answering machine recording a new message downstairs. I didn't have to see the light to know it was blinking. I crept down the stairs, my baseball bat from high school clutched in my hand. I stood in the dark hallway, listening to the tape play on its own. The voice was a guttural growl now, filled with a terrifying rage. "Get out of my house!" It roared, the sound distorted by the cheap speaker, making it sound monstrous and human. Then a long, drawn-out, rattling laugh that seemed to go on forever before the line went dead. My house. This was my grandmother's house. It was my house now. I started to shake uncontrollably. He wasn't just some random crank caller. He knew where I was, and he felt a claim to my home. For the next week, the calls came every day, each message more terrifying than the last. He would describe what I was wearing. "I liked a blue sweater," he'd whisper. He'd comment on what I was doing. "You left the back door unlocked for me." How thoughtful. I hadn't. I checked it 5 times. The calls started coming at all hours, waking me from a fitful sleep. The click of the machine, a harbinger of new terror. I felt like a prisoner, tormented by a disembodied voice and a single, blinking red light. I stopped leaving the house except for work. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. The police were called. An officer came, listened to the tapes, and looked concerned. He filed a report for harassment, but with an untraceable number, there was little he could do. He suggested I stay with a friend, but I was stubborn. This was my house. I refused to be driven out by a phantom on the phone. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the attic, going through my grandmother's old things, looking for some distraction. I found a dusty old photo album. In the back, tucked into a sleeve, was a yellowed newspaper, clipping from the 1970s. The headline read, "Local man murders family, kills self in farmhouse siege." I read the article with a growing sense of horror. It described a man named Elias Klein who had lived in my house, my grandmother's house, decades before she bought it. He had been a recluse, a violent man who, in a fit of paranoia, had murdered his wife and 2 children before turning the gun on himself. The article included a photo of him. He was a gaunt man with dark, hollow eyes and a cruel, thin mouth. It was a face from a nightmare. The article ended with a chilling detail. Before the police stormed the house, Klein had spent hours on the phone with the negotiator, whispering, screaming, and laughing. My blood ran cold. I dropped the album and ran downstairs. The red light on the answering machine was blinking. I had gotten a new message while I was in the attic. With trembling hands, I pressed play. There was no voice this time, just a sound. The sound of someone slowly, heavily, climbing the attic stairs. A sound coming not from the machine, but from right above my head. The answering machine hadn't been receiving calls from outside the house. The line was dead, just as I'd thought. The voice wasn't coming through the phone. It was coming from inside the house, from the very walls, a residual haunting, an echo of the evil that had happened there. But now the echo was becoming real. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there in the hallway, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow, heavy footsteps creak across the floorboards above me. The blinking red light wasn't a warning. It was an announcement. He wasn't on the phone anymore. He was home. Living alone in a top-floor apartment in a bustling city should have felt safe. I was insulated by the noise of the traffic below and the presence of neighbors on all sides. My apartment in a slightly worn-down 6-story brownstone was my haven, a small, cozy space with a single, precious luxury, a small, private rooftop patio, accessible only through a heavy glass door in my living room. I spent most of my summer evenings up there, surrounded by my potted plants, watching the sunset paint the sky over the cityscape. The problem began in late November, during the first big snowstorm of the season. The city was blanketed in a thick, sound-dampening layer of white. The usual roar of traffic was reduced to a muffled hush. It was on one of these unnaturally quiet nights that I first heard it, a soft, rhythmic scraping sound coming from directly above my head, from the roof. At first, I dismissed it. It was an old building. It was probably just snow and ice sliding off, or the wind whistling around a loose vent. But the sound was too regular, too deliberate. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. It sounded like someone was methodically dragging something heavy across the rooftop. I tried to ignore it, turning up the volume on my TV, but the sound persisted, a subtle, unnerving counterpoint to the sitcom laugh track. The scraping continued for about an hour, then stopped. I told myself I was being paranoid, my mind playing tricks on me in the muffled silence of the snowstorm. A few nights later, it happened again. Same time, just after midnight. Same sound. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. This time, it was accompanied by a low, guttural sound, like a large animal growling or a man clearing his throat. The noise sent a shiver of pure fear down my spine. Someone was on my roof. I called my landlord the next morning. He was a gruff, dismissive man who clearly thought I was a hysterical single woman. He assured me that no one had access to the roof except me. The main roof access was kept locked in the building's maintenance closet. He said it was probably a raccoon. A very large, very methodical raccoon. But I knew it wasn't an animal. The sounds were too purposeful. The scraping became a nightly ritual. I started to dread the nights. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening, my body tense with anxiety. I bought a heavy-duty security bar for the glass patio door and started sleeping with a can of pepper spray on my nightstand. My safe, cozy apartment had become a place of terror. One night, driven by a desperate need to know what was happening, I decided to look. I waited until the scraping sound was at the far end of the roof. Then I slowly, silently crept to the patio door. The roof was covered in a fresh layer of snow, glowing with the reflected light of the city. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I peered through the glass, and I saw it. It wasn't a person. It was a shape. A tall, impossibly thin, dark shape, hunched over near the edge of the roof. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was scraping at the roof's gravel surface with long, claw-like fingers, gathering the small stones into a neat pile. As I watched, it straightened up to its full, terrifying height. It must have been 7 feet tall, and turned its head slowly towards my door. It had no face, just a smooth, pale, blank expanse of skin where its features should have been. A scream tore from my throat. I stumbled backward, away from the door, my mind reeling in horror. The shape on the roof moved with a sudden, terrifying speed, scrambling across the snow-covered roof on all fours like a spider. It threw itself against the glass door with a sickening thud, the reinforced glass groaning under the impact. The blank, featureless face was pressed against the pane, its eyeless gaze seeming to bore right through me. I ran. I grabbed my keys and my phone and fled my apartment, not even stopping to put on shoes. I sprinted down the 5 flights of stairs and burst out into the freezing street, a babbling, hysterical mess. The police came. They went up to my apartment, their guns drawn. They found the patio door still locked, the security bar in place. But they also found deep, long scratch marks gouged into the glass and the metal frame. They went up to the roof. They found the neat little piles of gravel, and they found footprints in the snow. They weren't human. They were long and narrow, with claw marks at the tips, and they led from the edge of the roof to my patio door, and then back to the edge, where they simply stopped, as if the creature had leaped into the night sky. I never went back to that apartment. I broke my lease, abandoned my furniture, my plants, everything. The landlord kept my security deposit, still insisting it was a raccoon. But I know what I saw. I don't know what it was, or what it wanted. I only know that it lived on the roof, and that for weeks, it had been my silent, scraping, faceless neighbor, waiting just on the other side of the glass. Now, I live in a ground floor apartment. I never want to be that close to the sky again. The apartment was a steel, a spacious 1-bedroom in an older, pre-war building with thick walls and high ceilings. As a writer who works from home, I crave quiet, and the landlord had assured me the building was built like a fortress. For the first few months, it was perfect. The thick plaster walls muffled all but the most determined noises from my neighbors. I had found my urban hermitage. The only strange feature of the apartment was the old, ornate ventilation grates. They were made of cast iron, with an intricate floral design, and were set into the walls near the ceiling in the living room and bedroom. The building's heating had long since been updated to a modern system, so these vents were defunct, silent relics of another era. Or so I thought. The whispering started on a quiet Tuesday night. I was reading on the sofa when I heard it, a faint, sibilant hiss, like the sound of someone saying SSSH. I paused, listening. It was coming from the direction of the living room vent. I chalked it up to the wind, or the building's pipes. But the sound came again, clearer this time. It was a voice, a soft, dry whisper. I couldn't make out the words, just the cadence of speech. I got up on a chair and pressed my ear to the cold, iron grate. The whispering was clearer now, but still unintelligible, like hearing a conversation through a thick wall. It sounded like more than one person, their voices weaving in and out of each other. I felt a prickle of unease. Was I somehow picking up a neighbor's conversation through the old ductwork? It seemed unlikely, given the building's solid construction. The whispers became a regular occurrence, always at night, always faint, always just beyond the edge of comprehension. They were a low, constant murmur in the background of my quiet apartment, a secret conversation I was not meant to hear. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was a quirk of the old building, but the feeling of being listened to, of being privy to something I shouldn't be, began to gnaw at me. One night, I was jolted awake by a voice that was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. It came from the vent directly above my bed, a single, distinct female voice, dry and cracked like old parchment, whispered, "He's watching you." I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I wasn't just hearing a muffled conversation anymore. They were talking to me, or about me. I lay there for hours, my eyes wide open in the dark, listening. The unintelligible murmuring returned, but the one clear sentence echoed in my mind. "He's watching you." Who was he? The next day, I was a nervous wreck. Every shadow seemed to hold a figure. Every creak of the floorboards was a footstep. I tried to unscrew the vent grate in the bedroom, but the screws were ancient and stripped, rusted solidly in place. The whispers changed after that night. They were no longer just murmurs. I started to hear my own name. "Sarah," it would hiss from the living room vent. "Sarah, we see you." From the bedroom, they were the voices of old women, their words drawn out and raspy. They would comment on my actions. As I made dinner, I'd hear, "She's cutting the carrots now." as I got ready for bed. Look at her brushing her hair. I was living in a panopticon of whispers. I felt constantly observed, judged by these unseen, whispering entities. My sanity began to fray. I stopped speaking on the phone in my own apartment. I changed my clothes in the windowless bathroom. I felt a desperate, paranoid need for privacy that was impossible to achieve. I complained to the landlord, who looked at me as if I were insane. He told me the ductwork had been sealed off in the 50s, and that it was impossible for sound to be traveling through them. He suggested I see a doctor. Desperate, I decided to do my own research. I spent a day at the city archives, digging through old records about my building. I found what I was looking for in a series of old newspaper articles from the 1940s. My building hadn't always been apartments. It had originally been built as a sanatorium for women suffering from nervous disorders and hysteria. The article described the treatments, which were barbaric by today's standards: isolation therapy, hydrotherapy, lobotomies. But one detail made my blood run cold. The head physician, a Dr. Alistair Finch, had designed a unique auditory observation system. He had connected the vents in all the patients' rooms to a central listening post in his office, allowing him to monitor his patients' conversations, their every sigh and whisper, 24 hours a day. He believed their private mutterings were the key to their madness. Dr. Finch himself was a patient's he, who was always watching, always listening. The whispers weren't my neighbors. They were echoes, the psychic residue of dozens of tormented women, trapped forever in the vents, their paranoid whispers still searching for the man who was always listening. And now, they had a new subject to observe: me. The final straw came a few nights later. The whispers were frantic, agitated. "He's coming," they hissed over and over. "He's angry. He's coming for her." Then, a new voice joined the chorus, a man's voice, deep and commanding, coming from all the vents at once, filling the apartment with its terrifying authority. "Be quiet, girls," it boomed. "The patient is becoming agitated." And then I heard a sound that was not a whisper. It was the sound of old, rusted screws groaning as they were slowly, deliberately being turned from the other side of the vent. I didn't wait to see what would come out. I grabbed my purse and ran, leaving everything else behind. As I fled down the hallway, I could hear the iron grate in my living room fall to the floor with a heavy clang, followed by the soft, dry sound of something slithering out. I never went back. I know the whispers are still there, trapped in the iron lungs of that building, forever observing the empty rooms, waiting for a new patient to listen to. My sister, Emily, and her husband had just had their first baby, a sweet little girl named Chloe. When they asked me to house sit and babysit for a weekend while they took a much-needed getaway, I was thrilled. I adored my niece, and their modern, minimalist house in a quiet cul-de-sac was a welcome change from my own cramped apartment. The first night went perfectly. Chloe was an angel, sleeping soundly in her crib. The house was equipped with all the latest smart home tech, including a high-end video baby monitor with a handheld receiver that I could carry around with me. The picture was crystal clear. The audio was crisp. I could see and hear every little sigh and rustle Chloe made. The second night, the strange things started to happen. I was sitting on the couch, watching a movie, with the baby monitor on the coffee table beside me. Chloe was asleep, a peaceful little lump under her blanket. Suddenly, the monitor crackled with static. The image flickered, and for a split second, the camera angle shifted. Instead of looking down into the crib, the camera seemed to be looking up from inside the crib, at the ceiling. Then it blinked back to the normal view. I frowned, picking up the receiver. It was probably just a momentary glitch, a Wi-Fi hiccup. I checked on Chloe, still sound asleep, not a care in the world. I settled back on the couch, but a seed of unease had been planted. About an hour later, it happened again. This time, the image on the monitor didn't just flicker. It changed completely. For a few seconds, instead of Chloe's nursery, the screen showed a different room. It was a dark, cluttered room, with peeling wallpaper and a single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. A child's room, but one from a nightmare, filled with old, broken toys. In the corner, a rocking horse swayed back and forth on its own. Then, just as quickly, the image switched back to Chloe's peaceful nursery. My heart was hammering. What was I seeing? Was the monitor somehow picking up a feed from another house? I knew my sister's system was on a secure, password-protected network. It shouldn't have been possible. I crept upstairs and stood in the doorway of the nursery. The room was quiet and still. Chloe was sleeping peacefully. The camera was mounted on the wall where it should be, its little green power light glowing steadily. Everything was normal. I told myself I was tired, that I was imagining things. I went back downstairs, but I couldn't relax. I sat staring at the monitor, my eyes glued to the screen. For a while, nothing happened. Then the audio crackled. A voice came through the speaker. It was a child's voice, little boy, and he was singing a nursery rhyme I'd never heard before. The man in the wall is tall and thin. He sang in a high, clear, chilling voice. If you are bad, he'll let him in. The song ended with a giggle, and then there was silence. I stared at the monitor, my blood running cold. On the screen, Chloe was still fast asleep. The voice hadn't come from her room. It had come from the glitched-out, nightmare room. I was officially terrified. I almost called my sister, but I didn't want to ruin their one weekend away. I almost called the police, but what would I say? My baby monitor is haunted. I decided to try and figure it out myself. I went to my sister's office and found a manual for the baby monitor. I was looking for information on interference, on crossed signals. What I found was a small paragraph in the troubleshooting section. It mentioned that in rare cases, the monitor's frequency could inadvertently sync with older, analog-based electronics operating on a similar wavelength, such as old cordless phones or antique listening devices. A chill went down my spine. I remembered Emily mentioning that their house was built on the site of an old, torn-down orphanage from the 1950s. The monitor on the coffee table crackled again. I looked at the screen. It was showing the nightmare room again, but this time it wasn't empty. A tall and possibly thin, shadowy figure was standing in the corner, its long limbs bent at unnatural angles. The rocking horse was rocking faster and faster. The little boy's voice came through the speaker again, no longer singing, but whispering frantically. He's out. He's out. The man in the wall is out. And then, I heard a sound that wasn't from the monitor. It was a soft, scraping sound, coming from inside the walls of the nursery, right upstairs. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a large glass vase, and ran upstairs. I threw open the nursery door. The room was dark, but the screen of the baby monitor receiver in my hand cast a faint glow. The scraping sound from the wall stopped. Chloe was starting to stir in her crib, whimpering. On the monitor screen, the shadowy figure was gone from the nightmare room. The screen flickered violently, then settled on the normal view of Chloe's crib. But something was different. Standing over my niece's crib, its long, spindly fingers reaching down towards her, was the tall, thin, shadowy figure. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't an echo from the past. It was here. It had come through. The man from the wall was real. I don't remember screaming. I just remember lunging forward, swinging the vase with all my might at the space where the figure stood. I felt a strange, cold impact, and the shadow dissipated like smoke. I snatched Chloe from her crib and ran out of the house. I sat in my locked car in the driveway until the sun came up, holding my sleeping niece, the useless baby monitor lying on the passenger seat. I never told Emily the full story. I just told her the monitor was faulty and that she should get a new one. I know she thinks I'm overprotective now, but I know that for one terrifying night, that baby monitor wasn't just a window into my niece's room. It was a window into somewhere else, and something had climbed through. After a messy breakup, I moved into a small, furnished studio apartment on the 4th floor of an old, walk-up building. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a place to heal and reclaim my independence. The building had character, which was a nice way of saying it was old and a little decrepit. My apartment came with a hodgepodge of second-hand furniture, including a sturdy, but slightly sagging, double bed with a memory foam mattress. Being alone was the point, but some nights the solitude felt heavy, almost like a physical presence in the room. I'm a creature of habit. Every morning, the first thing I do is make my bed. I pull the sheets taut, smooth the duvet, and arrange the pillows just so. It's a small ritual of order that makes me feel like I have some control over my life. About a month into my stay, I came home from a long day at work and walked into my bedroom to find something amiss. My perfectly made bed was disturbed. On the right side of the bed, the side I never slept on, there was a clear, distinct impression in the memory foam. It was the shape of a human body. It was as if someone had been lying there on their back, their head leaving a shallow indent on the pillow. I could see the outline of their shoulders, their torso, their legs. It was a perfect, life-size silhouette. My blood ran cold. My first thought was that a squatter or a burglar had been in my apartment. I frantically checked my belongings. Nothing was stolen. Nothing else was out of place. The door was still locked. The windows were secure. There was no rational explanation. I tried to smooth the impression out, but the memory foam was stubbornly holding the shape. It was deeply unsettling, a ghostly presence made tangible. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, too afraid to get into the bed. The next morning, the impression was gone. The mattress had finally bounced back to its normal, smooth state. I told myself I must have imagined it, or that the foam had just settled strangely. I made the bed, my morning ritual now feeling less about order and more about erasing the evidence of something I couldn't explain. But it happened again a few days later. I came home to the same thing, the clear, undeniable impression of a body on the empty side of my bed. This time, it seemed deeper, more defined. I took a photo of it with my phone, needing proof that I wasn't losing my mind. This became a recurring phenomenon. Every few days, I would find the impression. Sometimes it was faint. Other times it was so deep it looked like someone had just gotten up. I started to dread coming home, my stomach twisting in knots as I opened my apartment door, wondering if the visitor had been there. I spoke to my neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived in the building for 40 years. I asked her about the previous tenant of my apartment. Her face grew sad. "Oh, you mean the young man," she said. "Such a tragedy. He was a lovely boy, but so lonely. He died in that apartment. In his sleep, they said. A heart attack, but I think he died of a broken heart." A chill washed over me. "In the bed?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded slowly. "That's what they said. They found him in the morning, just lying there peacefully." I went back to my apartment, my mind reeling. The impression wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense. It was a memory, a physical echo of the last moments of a lonely man, trapped in the very fabric of the mattress where he had died. He wasn't haunting me. He was just resting. The knowledge didn't make it less terrifying. In fact, it made it worse. I was sleeping next to the physical memory of a corpse. I tried to get a new mattress, but my landlord refused, citing the terms of my furnished lease. The final, horrifying event happened a week later. I woke up in the middle of the night, not because of a noise, but because of a feeling of intense cold. I was lying on my side of the bed, but the other side, the empty side, was ice cold, as if a block of dry ice were lying there. I slowly turned my head. In the dim light filtering in from the street, I could see the impression forming in real time. The mattress was slowly, silently sinking, conforming to the shape of an invisible body that was getting into bed right next to me. I could feel the mattress dip with its weight. I could feel the cold radiating from it, seeping into my own blankets. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I was paralyzed with a fear so profound it felt like my heart had stopped. I lay there rigid, my eyes squeezed shut, feeling the cold presence next to me. Just inches away, I felt a phantom weight settle on the pillow beside my head, and I could almost hear the faint, lonely sigh of a man finally coming to rest. I lay like that until dawn, not daring to move. When the first rays of sun hit my window, I bolted from the bed and ran out of the apartment. I never went back. I left all my things, my security deposit, everything. The photograph on my phone is the only proof I have. It shows the clear, sad, terrifyingly empty impression of a body on a bed, a memory of loneliness so strong it became a permanent resident. I live in a duplex, a narrow, two-story house that shares a single, central wall with the house next door. For the past year, the other half of the duplex has been empty, the owner having passed away, and the property tied up in some complicated probate battle. The silence from the other side of the wall was a constant, comforting presence. It meant I could play my music as loud as I wanted, and that my home was a self-contained bubble of solitude. The knocking started on a Wednesday night. I was washing dishes, the only sounds being the clatter of plates and the running water. Then I heard it. Tap, 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 tap. It was coming from the shared wall in the kitchen. It was soft, hesitant, like someone politely trying to get my attention. I froze, my hand still in the soapy water. My mind immediately jumped to a rational explanation. It was the pipes. It was the house settling. It couldn't be a person. The house next door was empty. I'd seen the official notices on the door. It was vacant and sealed. I tried to ignore it, but a few minutes later, it came again, from the same spot on the wall. Tap, 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 tap. This time it was a little more insistent. I dried my hands, walked over to the wall, and pressed my ear against the cool drywall. I heard nothing but the faint echo of my own heartbeat. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish. There was no response. The tapping stopped for the rest of the night. The next night, it happened again, but in a different room. I was in the living room, reading, when the knocking started on the shared wall behind my couch. Tap, 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 tap. Same rhythm. It was like a secret code I didn't understand. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. This wasn't the pipes. This was intelligent. It was responsive. I knocked back. Tap, 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 tap. The moment my knuckles left the wall, the tapping on the other side stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and unnerving. I had engaged with it. I had acknowledged it. And now it was waiting. The knocking became a nightly occurrence, a terrifying game of call and response. It would start in a different room each night, as if it were exploring the layout of my house from the other side of the wall. It would knock on the wall in my hallway as I walked past. It would knock on the wall behind my headboard as I tried to sleep. I started to feel like I was living in a cage with something that was constantly testing the bars. I was sleep-deprived and on edge. I called the estate company, handling the property next door. A harried-sounding woman assured me, in no uncertain terms, that the house was empty, secured, and checked weekly by their staff. "No one is in that house, ma'am," she said, her tone implying I was wasting her time. "It's impossible." Desperate, I decided to investigate myself. The house next door was a mirror image of my own. I knew that the spot it was knocking from in my bedroom corresponded to the closet in the other house. I went outside and peered into the grimy windows of my neighbor's house. It was dark and empty, filled with dusty, shrouded furniture. There was no sign of life. One night, the knocking changed. It was no longer a polite tapping. It was a frantic, desperate pounding. Bang, bang, bang. It came from the shared wall in my upstairs bathroom, right next to the shower. It was so violent it shook the picture frames on my side of the wall. It sounded like someone was being murdered, trying to signal for help. I scrambled for my phone and dialed 911. As I was talking to the dispatcher, my voice shaking, the pounding was replaced by a new sound, a slow, methodical scraping. Scrapey, scrapey. It was the sound of something sharp being dragged down the other side of the wall, from the ceiling to the floor. The police arrived and, with my frantic urging, they forced entry into the neighboring house. I stood in my own doorway, watching as two officers disappeared into the dark, silent home. They were in there for about 20 minutes. When they came out, their faces were pale and grim. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, "the house is empty. There's no one here." But the pounding. I insisted. The scraping. The officer sighed. "We saw what you were talking about," he said, his voice low. "On the wall in the upstairs bathroom, on their side, there are scratch marks." He shone his flashlight onto a photo on his phone to show me. The drywall on the other side of my bathroom was covered in deep, ragged gouges, splintered and torn, running from the ceiling to the floor. It looked like a wild animal had been trapped in there, trying to claw its way through, but the dust on the floor was undisturbed. There were no footprints. Nothing. They left, filing it as an unexplained disturbance. I was left alone with the silence. The knocking stopped after that night, but the silence is worse. I can't look at the walls in my own home without thinking about what's on the other side. I don't know what was making the noise, what was trying to get my attention, or what was trying to claw its way through the wall. I only know that it was my neighbor, and for some reason, it wanted to get in. I bought my first house in a quiet, older neighborhood in a small Midwestern town. It was a modest, charming bungalow with a big, grassy backyard. The yard was the main selling point for me and my golden retriever, Buster. The only odd feature was the old, rusty swing set that stood in the far corner of the yard, partially swallowed by an overgrown lilac bush. It was a relic from a previous family, its red paint peeling, the chains creaking ominously. I made a mental note to tear it down, but life got in the way, and the swing set remained. Buster, who was usually a boisterous, happy-go-lucky dog, hated that corner of the yard. He would never go near the swing set. If I threw a ball in that direction, he would stop short, whine, and refuse to retrieve it, his eyes fixed on the empty swings. I thought it was strange, but I figured there was a squirrel's nest or some other animal's scent that was putting him off. I work from home, my desk situated in front of a large window that overlooks the backyard. One afternoon, about a month after I moved in, I was staring out the window, procrastinating, when I saw one of the swings moving. It was a calm, windless day, yet the right-hand swing was swaying back and forth gently, rhythmically, as if a small child had just gotten off. I watched it for a long time, a strange feeling of unease settling over me. It just kept swinging, a slow, steady, silent motion. Buster, who was lying at my feet, suddenly sat up, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he stared intently at the moving swing. This became a regular occurrence. Every few days, always in the afternoon, always on a calm day, the same swing would start to move on its own. I tried to find a rational explanation. An unusual air current, the ground settling. Nothing made sense. The swing set became a source of quiet dread, a constant, unnerving presence in my otherwise peaceful backyard. One evening, I had a neighbor over for a barbecue. She was an older woman who had lived on the street for over 50 years. I casually mentioned the haunted swing set. Her friendly expression immediately vanished, replaced by a look of sadness and fear. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't know about the little boy." She told me a story from 30 years ago about the family who had lived in my house before the previous owners. They had a son, a quiet, 6-year-old boy named Michael. He loved that swing set more than anything. He would spend hours out there, swinging by himself. One summer afternoon, he had been swinging, and a tragic, freak accident occurred. He had tried to jump off midair, and he had fallen, breaking his neck. He died instantly, right there at the foot of the swing set. His parents moved away right after. My neighbor finished, her eyes filled with tears. They couldn't stand to look out at that yard. They said they could still see him out there, swinging. After she left, I stood at my window, staring at the dark, silent swing set. The story had chilled me to the bone. The gentle, swinging motion I had been seeing was no longer just a creepy quirk. It was the echo of a tragedy, the ghost of a little boy who didn't know he was gone. The phenomena began to change. I no longer just saw the swing moving. I started to hear it. At night, I would be awakened by the faint, rhythmic creak of the rusty chains, the sound carrying through my open bedroom window. Creak, creak, creak. Sometimes I would hear a soft, childish giggle on the night air. Buster became almost catatonic with fear. He refused to go into the backyard at all, even to relieve himself. He would cower by the back door, whining, his hair standing on end. The most terrifying incident happened on the anniversary of the boy's death, though I didn't know it at the time. I was awakened around 2 a.m. by the frantic, desperate barking of my dog. Buster was standing in my bedroom doorway, barking furiously at the window that overlooked the yard. I got up and cautiously peered outside. The yard was bathed in the pale light of a full moon. The swing was moving, not gently this time, but swinging high, almost parallel to the ground, as if being pushed by an unseen, powerful force. And sitting on the swing, silhouetted against the moon, was the small, translucent figure of a little boy. I could see right through him, to the trees behind. He was pumping his legs, trying to go higher and higher. I couldn't see his face, but I could hear his laughter, a high, joyful sound that was utterly terrifying in its context. Then he did it. At the very apex of his swing, he let go and jumped. His small, ghostly form flew through the air in a perfect arc, but instead of landing on the ground, he just vanished. He dissolved into the air before he hit the grass. The swing continued to sway violently for a few moments, then gradually slowed, coming to a rest. The yard was silent again. The next morning, I called a demolition company. I stood in my kitchen and watched as two men dismantled the old swing set with heavy tools, cutting the rusty chains and digging the legs out of the ground. As they hauled the last piece of scrap metal to their truck, I felt a palpable sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from the house, from the yard. The swinging has stopped. The ghostly laughter is gone. Buster will finally play in the far corner of the yard again. But sometimes, when the afternoon light is just right, I look out at the empty patch of grass where the swing set used to be, and I think I can almost see the faint impression of two small footprints, right where a little boy landed, over and over again. I live in a rural part of northern Minnesota, where the winters are long, brutal, and deeply isolating. My house is a small, one-story cabin, miles from my nearest neighbor, surrounded by a vast, silent forest of pine and birch. For most of the year, I love the solitude. But in the dead of winter, when the snow is 5 feet deep and the temperature plummets to 30 below, the solitude can take on a menacing quality. The world shrinks to the four walls of my cabin, and the silence is so profound it feels like a sound in itself. During one particularly harsh cold snap, the frost began to take over my windows. It wasn't the delicate, feathery frost I was used to. This was a thick, opaque sheet of ice that coated every pane of glass, sealing me off from the outside world. The windows became milky, white canvases, turning my cabin into a blind, white tomb. It was on the third day of this deep freeze that I first noticed a pattern. I was drinking my morning coffee, staring blankly at the frosted-over kitchen window. In the center of the thick, white ice, a strange, intricate pattern was forming. It looked like a network of fine, black lines, spreading out from a central point like a spider's web or the veins on a leaf. I leaned in closer. They weren't just lines. They were symbols. Tiny, intricate, and unfamiliar, like some form of ancient, runic alphabet. I'd never seen anything like it. I scraped at it with my fingernail, but the pattern was on the outside of the glass, sandwiched between the pane and the thick layer of ice. By that evening, the pattern had spread, covering the entire window. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling. I went to the living room. The same runic pattern was blooming across the large picture window, the tiny black symbols swirling and connecting in complex, mesmerizing designs. I checked every window in the cabin. Every single one was covered in the same strange, icy calligraphy. I felt a primal fear creep in. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. Frost doesn't form in perfect, repeating symbols. It felt like a message, a language I couldn't understand, being written on the walls of my prison. The house no longer felt empty. It felt like something was outside, patiently, methodically, leaving me notes. That night, the sound started. A soft, scratching sound, coming from all the windows at once. It was the sound of something sharp, like a fingernail or a claw, tracing the patterns in the frost from the outside. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was the sound of the artist admiring their work, or perhaps adding to it. I spent the night huddled in the center of the room, away from the windows, a heavy fireplace poker in my hands. The scratching was relentless, a delicate, terrifying symphony that lasted until dawn. The next day, I tried to melt the frost. I cranked the wood stove until the cabin was sweltering. I even tried a hairdryer, holding it against the glass until my arm ached. The frost on the inside of the glass melted, but the thick outer layer and the patterns within it remained unchanged. The symbols seemed to mock me from behind their icy shield. Desperate for answers, I took a high-resolution photo of the patterns with my phone and emailed it to a professor of linguistics and ancient cultures at a university I'd once attended. I told him it was a pattern I'd found on a rock. I didn't want him to think I was crazy. The scratching that night was different. It was faster, more agitated. It was accompanied by a low, chittering sound, a noise that sounded like 1,000 insects or dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was a sound that vibrated with a cold, alien intelligence. It was angry. It knew I was trying to understand. The professor emailed me back the next morning. His message was brief and alarming. "Where did you find this? This isn't a known language. It bears some resemblance to certain Proto-Siberian ritualistic scripts, but it's been altered. These symbols are not for communication. They are for binding. They are part of a ritual to create a doorway, or a cage. Based on the recursive nature of the patterns, I'd say whatever is being summoned or trapped is not something you want to meet. I would advise you to leave the area immediately." A doorway, a cage. My blood turned to ice. As I read the email, a new sound began. A low, resonant humming, coming from the windows themselves. The glass in the frames began to vibrate. I looked at the picture window. The center of the runic pattern was beginning to glow with a faint blue light. The humming grew louder, the vibration more intense. The light in the center of the window brightened, pulsing with the hum. The scratching and chittering outside reached a fever pitch. It was happening. The ritual was reaching its conclusion. The doorway was opening. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed the heavy fireplace poker, reared back, and smashed the picture window. The glass exploded inwards in a shower of icy shards and runic frost. A blast of impossibly cold air filled the room, along with a high-pitched, inhuman shriek that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. The humming stopped. The light vanished. The scratching ceased. Silence. I stood there, gasping in the freezing air, my heart pounding in my chest. Outside the shattered window, there was nothing but the silent, snow-covered trees. But on the floor, amongst the shards of glass, the snow was churned up, and there were tracks. They weren't animal tracks. They were long, thin, three-toed prints, like a bird's, but far too large. They led from the forest to my window, and now they were leading away, back into the deep, dark woods. I left the cabin that day and never went back. I don't know what was trying to get in, or what it was binding to my home. I only know that for 3 days, I was living inside a summoning circle, and something ancient and terrible was writing its name on my windows.